And Lori, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
So I am the co-founder and chief operating officer of Avanti Senior Living. And Avanti is a boutique senior living community that specializes primarily in assisted living and memory care.
Terrific. So I want to do just a little bit of housekeeping here. The first thing is a number of you already know you do not have to be signed into Blab to watch, which is one of the great things. If you do want to comment, you can do that in the little box on the right-hand side, but you do have to sign in, and the only way to sign in is to have a Twitter account, which is also free. You can comment to your heart's content. We'll be able to see those. If you have a question, you can type the letter Q with a / a space in the question. That'll actually show up in our left-hand box to be able to see that. I am recording this Blab, and we will reuse it in some fashion at Senior Housing Forum. And that, with that, and I expect that we're going to go for probably 30 to 45 minutes. No specific time, but that's sort of what the goal is. And what I want to talk about today is how to make team members love coming to work every day. And I know that we've got 3 experts who are passionate about making that happen. And I want to start by saying that I've had a number of discussions over the last few months with James Balda and others at Argentum, formerly Alpha, and they're getting ready to put out a report that'll talk about the state of senior living today and sort of their vision for between now and 2025. And one of the critical issues that they're hearing about over and over again from senior living providers is this idea that staffing is going to be a big, big issue. Sort of 3 areas. The first is that are there just going to be enough people to hire? The second is, how do we get new talent and new leadership in the industry? And the third issue is, what about the cost? Right now, we know that the data tells us that about 60% of the cost of assisted living is staffing. And if we're looking at a staff shortage, how do we address that issue? And so I want to just start by asking, I'm going to start with you, Dan, because you're in Canada, is how do you see the issues? Are those, do you see that as being consistent with what you're saying?
It's very consistent, Steve. And I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there with the big challenges that we're facing in our industry. Our turnover rate for staffing is increasing, and it's troubling to see that, because the good staff, obviously you spend so much energy and time recruiting, and the costs are significant, and you want to create that kind of environment where staff want to come to work, that this is their workplace of choice. This is a calling. This is really not a career. I don't think people really go into this because they're just looking for a job. So we are seeing a shortage of people who want to work with the elderly, and definitely a shortage of people who have the right skill set and the aptitude for caring for the most vulnerable people in our population.
Okay, terrific. Looks like we're having a little bit of a broadcast thing. Looks like we're at audio only with both Denise and Lori. But Denise, do you have thoughts on these issues, and what are you seeing?
Sure, absolutely. Exactly what you said, that people are having a tougher time recruiting good quality people, that we're all expecting it to only get worse. And that as an industry, we're fighting over the really, the same group of people and trying to attract them. And what are we doing differently in our organizations that are going to attract those people that we want there and that live out the mission and the vision and the values, and really represent the organization in the way that we want it to be represented. And I think that in some ways I'm thankful that people are putting a closer eye on this. Something I think that just we took for granted a lot of times, for a long time, I should say. That now it's really starting. People are saying, what can we do for our staff? What can we do for our team members? I mean, some organizations have always done it, but I think a lot more are recognizing the power of their workforce and what they need to do to take care of them.
So you're sort of suggesting that in some sense the crunch is actually going to turn out to be a good thing, even though there be some disruptions along the way.
Well, I think it's a good thing that we're even having this conversation, that there's an interest in it, that,
Right.
people say, well, who cares about the staff? Our residents are at the center of everything that we do. And, which is true. But, in my work, it's taking good care of the staff. And so they take good care of the residents. And I know everybody on here knows that. But I think there's some organizations that still kind of struggle with that concept. They don't see the connect between, and there was some recent research they even did as far as abuse, that organizations that have a culture of where staff bully each other, there's more incidents of abuse of residents.
Interesting.
Yeah, makes sense. So Lori, you're just opening new buildings, and so you're having to hire a whole bunch of new staff. Does this worry? Are you seeing that in your marketplaces of having a tough time finding people and costs going up? And what are your thoughts about it?
Yeah, so I've had the opportunity to take my experience in senior housing from the past. I've been doing this for 17 years, and the struggle still remains the same. No one can kind of figure out the secret sauce to have good employee satisfaction. So when we kind of redesigned our entire product, meaning our community, we kept our team members on the forefront of even from the design and aesthetic portion of when we were creating it. And so right now, honestly, we're not really having a hard time finding staff nor retaining them. And I think a part of that is just attributed to, we did certain things within our organization to not only tell our team members that we value them, we built things into our actual community and then our onboarding process, and then giving them extra services to show that we really value it. So we kind of walk the talk a little bit differently than what we're typically used to seeing in senior housing.
So so I know it's still early, but how are these new team members responding to this?
They love it. They love it. And so we have what we call Avanti Swag, and it's not your scrubs or polo shirt with khaki pants, kind of your stereotypical senior housing uniform. What we have is the Avanti Swag, and it's very similar to like a boutique hotel. Our executive team and concierge, they wear a black suit. Everyone is in black, and every department is branded. And for the first time in my career, I've actually seen where our team members are genuinely excited about coming to work, and they come to work feeling good, looking good, and their attitude is just really, really positive. And for us, it kind of starts in the expectation we give of, dress for success, and we provide that to them, all the way down to when you're there, we want you to be successful, we want you to be empowered, and we also want you to feel a part of the team. And we do that throughout the day, and we do that by our team lounge, or providing them a free meal. There's just a lot of different things that we do to show them they're important to us.
Cool. So, go ahead.
Sorry, I just say, you didn't mention, which is so cool when you spoke about the innovation with the fact that up front.
Yeah, so typically that was a part of just very methodical design when we looked at the architecture. So most of the time, the team lounge is located in the back of the building, and it's VE'd. It's got linoleum and old tables with metal lockers. We actually have our team lounge is at the front of the building with our executive director and business office manager. In fact, they have doors that are glass that lead directly into that team lounge. When you're in that team lounge, it has the same exact finishes as the entire building. There's no VEing in that area. We've got everything from a ping pong table that is used all the time. In fact, when I walk in the building, they challenge me. And now we have it to where the executive directors of our new buildings that are being built, we let them pick what kind of gaming thing that they want. So like our next one that's about to open, she selected an air hockey machine. And then we have, we have, tables that have plug-ins so they can charge their phone. The lockers aren't metal, they're wood, just like it's used throughout the building. There's beanbag chairs, and the finishes are just as nice. It's very Google-like, and it's warm and welcoming, and you want to go in there to take your break. And the team members love it.
So you talked about doing free meals. That's kind of unusual. What about that? Is it too expensive? Cost of doing that? I'm curious.
It's a penny business. We all get that. In our industry, it's definitely not common. And, listening to restaurant businesses, it's kind of not common there either. And it was just a methodical decision that we made because, the cost of a meal to someone who already, isn't making six figures every year or something means a lot. And it goes a long way. And to me, it was that choice of, let's walk the talk that our team members are just as important. And so that's just one way of doing it. Yes, does it add up? It does. But if it can help reduce my turnover, if it can help make my team members happier, which in turn, that's what makes the residents happy, it's a winning situation. It's worth the investment.
Cool. So Dan, do you guys do free meals just out of curiosity?
We don't do free meals. I think it's a great idea. I can tell you what we do is we just had it last week, our annual staff Christmas banquet, and we invite everyone to come to that. It's a big event. They bring their spouses. Our suppliers give us gifts to give out to staff. So we do that once a year. I wish we did it every day, but the whole area around staff appreciation and recognition, it's so critical. And one of the things that what we do in terms of our budget is that we just lump that into salaries and benefits. So if you think of it as an add-on, then it's a good thing that you could cut out when you're doing your budget process. But if you lump it into the salaries and benefits and it's that general HR cost, and that's the way to do it. And the point that Lori made around the cost of recruitment and retention, if you think about how much it costs to just for the orientation shifts, that's something that you can see on your budget, on your bottom line. You can see how much those orientation shifts cost. But the other thing that you don't see that really is a big cost item is the whole area around how much time the staff, the leaders, your HR departments and your support team is spending around recruiting time, looking at signing people on to benefits. And there's so much paperwork that we do here. It's mind-boggling how many hours of staff we're spending on that. So if you can find people who are engaged and who will invest themselves in your organization, I think that's very smart investments. That's money well spent.
Well, one of the things that I want to be a little careful about where I talk about it, but there were two buildings that opened up as sort of at the height of the downturn in senior living back 5 or 6 years ago. And they were in a market, the market would just barely support one building, and there were 100 unit plus buildings that were built and opened at the same time. And the management companies took two very different approaches to it. The first one looked at that and they turned over the executive director and the marketing director about every 6 or 8 months because they needed to do something. The other company took the approach that we, the development operating company, made the mistake. We picked the wrong market and we were just unlucky, but we fundamentally hired good people and we are going to stick with those good people. And you talk about sort of the non-measurable or hard to measure costs. What happened is, if you could fast forward to 3 years down the road, the building where they hung in there with the executive director and the marketing team was 30-40% fuller than the one that was not. So Denise, one of the things that we talk about in the industry, and I know you spend time talking to people about, is that we have this huge turnover problem in senior living. And it seems like it ought not be that way because we're doing this very elegant work where we're helping frail elders in their last years or months or weeks of their lives. The thoughts on why the turnover is so high?
Yeah, so it's funny. I'm just working on this this article, and I pulled up some information. And what it said was 89% of employers think their people leave for more money, and that's what I do focus groups with leadership teams and staff and so forth. And the leadership teams very often make those comments. And even though we know we've read all the articles that say that's not true, that's still kind of what comes out of our mouths when it's our organization and we're talking about why are people leaving. And in reality, what they found is that 12% of people, so 12% of employees actually leave for more money. So 89% of managers blame the money. And what happens when we blame the money, we don't look in the mirror at ourselves, right?
Yep.
And so, and that's, I think, it's exactly what I find. So Dan and Lori both said, the piece of recognition, and it seems so trite and, oh, it's just a thanks, but it's by far, when I do focus groups, the majority of staff, that's what they talk about. Gallup says it's praise within 7 days. Someone's received praise or recognition within 7 days is the marker. 7 days, and that's not very, that's 1 week, and without somebody's getting a praise or recognition, we think we do an annual award ceremony or even an employee month. It's just not enough because we're not connecting it to something really specific that people do. And so even when we talk about Christmas parties, I mean, people, it's honoring people, but are we truly honoring them, or just sort of having this great party and people don't even take it as, oh, they're recognizing me for the hard work that I've done. So connecting the dots for folks. So I think the ability for people to really kind of look hard in the mirror as leaders and mid-managers and supervisors. It may even be a nurse or a cook that's supervising people. It doesn't have to necessarily be the top person, but recognizing how impactful their actions are on people staying with the organization or leaving.
Cool. So I just finished reading Daniel Pink's book called Drive. Mm-hmm. I will confess that I tried reading his book. I forget what it's called. Everybody's a salesperson or something, and I read about half of it. And I just kind of didn't. And then I heard him speak at Leading Age in Boston, and I think it was the best of the general sessions by far. Mm-hmm. And so I went back and picked up his book Drive. And one of the things that he talks about that I found really, really fascinating was the idea that when companies design their systems to manage and control their employees, they're designed around this idea that the employees are going to act in bad faith.
Yeah. Yes.
Mm-hmm. And yet, in truth, the studies show that only about 15% of all employees are bad faith employees. Most of them really want to do a good job, like coming to work, want to support the organization. And so when you go a layer deeper, he suggests that what we actually need to be doing is designing our work systems, our employee systems for the 85% rather than the 15%. Thoughts on that? Denise, I'm going to start with you.
I always say, you get what you expect. And so when we expect the best from people, we get it. And we treat people like we expect the best. But what happens is, I agree with you, we very often treat, and I'm an ex-administrator, as you know, Steve, but everyone else might not know. So I've lived it. It's not like I'm just talking philosophy. I've lived it. But we design policies and process that everyone's trying to get away with something. I mean, think about all the doors that are locked that hinder people's work because they're locked, and which is that someone's trying to steal something from. I mean, there's so many things to do, right? And hidden messages. Where we put, like Lori said, the team room, I love that concept because it says, we trust you to be out front. We want people to see you, we care about you. And so even something like that, whereas, most of the time it's like, everyone hidden in the back because who knows what they'll be doing over there during lunchtime. So often we are thinking about, what is going to go wrong. And we design, something does go wrong. We design a policy, a process, and change because of one incident. Mm-hmm. Those rare occasions become our rules all of a sudden instead of looking at what happens, the other 99% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So Dan, I want to turn to you just for a minute. And so how do you design and operate for the 85% rather than the 15% at Tabor Village?
Well, I think you'd have to look at your organizational philosophy. What kind of working environment are you trying to create? And we're a Mennonite faith-based sponsored organization. And because of that perspective, community is really important to us. And you don't have to just be faith-based to have community. I think any organization, that's so critical. And there's a German word called Gemeinschaft. Gemeinschaft is that idea that there's a symbiotic relationship that is that everyone's connected together in this community. So I believe why people want to come to work every day is because they want to be part of something bigger. than themselves. They want to see change. They want to see lives enhanced, people transformed. And I believe that you can create a working environment where people really want to come to work because they know something great's going to happen that day, that they're going to feel recognized and rewarded by the people they're working with and the work that they're doing. And I think if you build around the idea that there's goodness in everybody, even people who you think, they just happen to land in elder care. They probably could have done something else. They could have ended up keeping that waitress job, or they could have been spent their career at the lumber yard, but they somehow ended up getting into elder care. I believe that every single person has inherent value, and if you treat them well, and you don't treat them like they're going to they're the 15%, that you treat the 100% like they're the 100%, I really think that you can have a much better success and a happier workforce. And people really like the idea that the leaders in the organization, and even the informal leaders, that they have trust in everyone that they're working with.
So, foster friendships at work or not? And what about friendships between, say, management level and line staff? Lori?
Yikes, that's a tough one.
It is a tough one. That's why I threw it to you.
Yeah, my philosophy is we don't force folks to go out and have drinks for happy hour or hang out on, with each other over the weekend, or go to breakfast or dinner on Saturdays. But what we do want is them to be respectful at work. And if they are friends and can separate the difference, then great, because you spend a lot of your time with the folks that you are working with. But if you can't separate it and becomes an interference, at the end of the day, the leader is held accountable. And so they're accountable for their performance. And so if they can't separate it, then that's kind of on them. But honestly, I don't think anything's wrong with being friends at work. We spend a lot of time with each other. We're all friends, Why can't the folks in a community be friends? They actually might come to work a little bit more if they had friends.
Yeah. Denise, what are your thoughts?
So one of the things that I found very shocking after I was an administrator, I learned that in that Gallup engagement survey, one of the top 12 indicators of an employee's engaged in their work or not is the question, I have a best friend at work. That's one of the top 12 indicators of someone being engaged in their work, which I find fascinating. But what they have found is if you have a best friend at work, that you're more committed at work, that you are, truly engaged in helping each other and helping, your team of folks. So I found that fascinating. So I think that, like Laura said, you can't force people into it, but the ability that, you're more likely to help your friend and someone that you care about, at work, than you would be someone that you really have no relationship with, that you're just working side by side with.
Well, it's fascinating to me because I've heard dozens of stories talking about employee relationships or work relationships where people talk about friendships in the context of them being very destructive to the organization, that favors get passed back and forth, and that it really hurts the people who are on the outside rather than the inside. But I don't know that I've ever actually heard anybody really talk about in the business world about how friendships actually benefit. And maybe that's something those are stories we ought to be looking for and talking about, how friendships are really making a difference to solidify the workplace. I don't know. What do you think, Dan?
So one of the things to always keep in mind is there's a principle called fidelity. So the employee has an obligation to the employer, and that obligation trumps friendships. So that's really where this gets tricky, is that if a friend who's also an employee tells you something, that you might feel obligated to pass that on to the employer. In fact, under the fidelity principle, you are, and that's where it gets tricky. So I think, but that's less than a 15%. That's probably a 1% kind of situation where you're informed of something that you have to pass on. But creating that kind of friendship environment, and just like Denise said around the Gallup survey, we've done that survey with our leadership team here, and you really want people to feel like, and to truly have a best friend at work. And so we do invest time and energy at the leadership level and right across our staff around people feeling engaged and feeling like there is a strong connection with their colleagues, and that they do look at them like they would a friend.
You know, and I would also add, I think one of the big differences of why this topic of friends in a workplace is important is because we're starting to see the shift of the millennials, right?
Right.
And how their mindset for how businesses are run are very different than 20 years ago, where it was very hierarchical, very red tape. You never go above your boss's head. You dare not walk into the executive's office. You know, it was very, very rigid. And the folks that we're starting to see applying, they want Google. I mean, you know, they want Zappos. They want a culture of feeling included. They want fun, friendship. They want to know the business vision. They have to buy into that vision as well for them to be successful. They want the information for, you know, that their company is based on.
So, Laura, one of the things you said I really like is, and one of the challenges I see in a lot of senior living communities is the idea that we really need to have more transparency. That people need to be able to know what you, as the owner, operator, manager, is thinking, and I would even argue that it's important for them to sometimes know that you don't have all the answers, rather than thinking you do, and that I think there's a sense that if you don't come across like you have all the answers, that somehow they're not going to trust you or be loyal to you. But the truth of the matter is that they're going to see you as more human and more likely to give you grace if there's a problem.
That's right. That's right. And they want to feel a part, and they want to have friends, and they want to, you know, hang out in the employee lounge and have a good time in a healthy environment. Those are things that we're starting to see a shift of on the HR front.
That's really neat. So one other question I want to kind of get to here is that it seems like, and Denise, particularly as you and I have talked, we tend to really focus on the idea that we need to take care of the frontline staff. And that's where we worry about turnover most, and staff availability and cost, and I guess in some sense in terms of headcounts, maybe the highest cost. But it seems like we don't spend very much time talking about how to do better leadership development at the department level, and even say at the executive director or director of marketing level. And it really occurs to me that much of the reason we have trouble at the line staff level is because it's really that leadership. And even in senior living, what ends up happening is we sort of just, you know, an executive director gets fired and they go get picked up by somebody else who goes and gets picked up by somebody else. And so we just rotate this around. So I'm really sort of curious to see what your thoughts are about how do we actually develop the leadership skills at the leadership level, at the executive director level, at the department level, at the regional level. I mean, regionals so often get to be regionals because they are pretty good at what they do, and they may be pretty good at what they do because they were lucky or because they actually did something right. But it may not be that they really have great leadership skills. So thoughts on that, Denise?
So we commit to it, basically. You know, you commit to that leadership development piece. And it's true, it's people who get to the regional level. But even as an administrator or executive director, very often folks don't have any sort of leadership background. So it's like you might take coursework in school and a bunch of things. You might have had hopefully a good manager or leader that you look up towards and you're trying to emulate a little bit. But people, for the most part, you know, don't have any sort of formal opportunities for leadership development. So there's all sorts of ways. And, you know, and in my mind, it's really the greatest commitment an organization can make if they're truly committed to the, you know, I don't like frontline staff, but direct care staff or, right. You know, if they're really truly committed to it, then they need to first look in the mirror at themselves. And because they're also setting the bar and the culture for the middle managers, so those supervisors and so forth. So you can have, you know, great direct care staff, but if their hands are tied from doing the work that they want to do, because they don't feel like they have a voice in the organization,
right?
Appreciated, they don't feel like they're making a difference. Like Dan said earlier, you know, that sense of everyone coming to work and treating them like they're a 10, as John Maxwell, the leadership guru, would say. You know, how you treat, but folks don't even think about that. It's just you're so busy putting out fires. I once asked, when I started my company, I asked my friends in the field, I said, if you had to change one thing as a leader in the aging services, what would it be? And I can't say how many people just said to me, I just want time to go to the bathroom. I just want time to go to the bathroom. And so we laugh about it, but that's the real reflection on leadership, that it's just constantly putting out fires. And that if we're having people step up to the plate, we don't have to be so quote unquote busy all the time, and we're able to focus on the big picture stuff, which helps the organization overall. Because I think we make a lot of decisions just sort of on the fly, which takes away the decision making from other people, as well as is probably not the best decision because we don't have all the input that we need from others.
Well, yeah, and I think that one of the things we sort of like being the expert and the go-to for everything, right? Yeah. The problem is it doesn't help grow our staff and anything. So Dan, I want to kind of come back to you for a minute here. And maybe this is sort of a good question for each of you. What do you do to develop your leadership skills and the leadership skills of in your particular case, Dan, your department heads?
So on a personal basis, I do spend a lot of time reading and doing research in what are the latest trends, the best ways of providing care and services to the elderly, and in particular, looking at what is an engaged workforce look like, not just in our sector, but in other sectors. And I love the example of Zappos. So Zappos is one of those companies that I knew a lot about in terms of their leadership technique and their management, but didn't know a lot about even what they did. I forgot that they sold shoes. And that's how strong their brand is in terms of being a great place to work and that culture. So how do you create that kind of a culture in long-term care? So I look at other organizations within the sector and outside the sector, do a lot of reading, attend lots of conferences, and I really spend a lot of energy on that and try to, for myself, and this does come into leading others. I believe strongly in professional development, in particular around an annual performance appraisal. And I don't mean the traditional one. I mean one that's really meaningful, where the individual does some introspection, they get feedback from their team, and then from that, they form the professional development plan. And I really think that's the only reason why we should do this is for personal improvement for the staff we're working with. And I believe that's the one gift you can give the people that report to you and who report to them is feedback, and not just once a year, but all throughout the year, and that everybody should get that kind of feedback and have opportunities for education and development. And I think that's where the direct care staff who have moved up the ranks, they don't necessarily have any leadership background. Maybe informally they do, but you want to be able to give them a framework, a leadership framework that they can work from.
Well, I really like I like the idea that you'd actually give some leadership training to frontline staff. We tend to give them maybe some practical stuff, but how about really elevating them is really a great idea. So, Lori, what are you doing to help leadership in your team?
Yeah, so leadership is a big part of where my heart falls. People ask me why I do what I do. My whole thing is just helping our team grow to be the best of what they can be. And so we focus a lot on goals and goal setting and take them in small increments instead of annually, because those kind of get lost and put on a shelf. And we have our onboarding for our kind of.
Looks like we lost it.
Oh, did you lose me?
Maybe it was.
Am
just
I back?
Oh yeah, you're back.
We spent a lot of time on culture and delivering hospitality service, which is empowering. So I can't say necessarily to our frontline staff we do a lot of leadership training. I think that's great, Dan, and it's probably something that we should look into. But kind of on that next level of the management team and the EDs and our regional and home office, I personally spent a lot of time infusing in small increments, leadership examples, leadership topics, books, articles, or just basic business things, because our EDs are master of a planning program, master of care, master of engagement, I mean, they have everything. We ask them to oversee and be an expert at everything. And that's really hard. And a lot of times the business portion is overlooked because they're so busy. And so the way I look at it is, it's our job at the home office level is to kind of teach our executive directors to become better businessmen or better businesswomen, and helping them understand, you know, what revenue does, what expenses do to drive a bottom line, and in turn teach their teams how to do that. And that ultimately kind of cultivates a culture of good leadership, because leadership is more than just, you know, motivating. It's also, you know, teaching them to be smart at what they do every single day. So we try to look at it from a blended perspective.
Well, I think that one of the things I keep coming across is that the hardest part is that sometimes we need to be able to look at things differently. And teaching ourselves how to do that and knowing how to do that is really tough. I use a coach, some for speech, some for business coaching, and a lot of that is that she helps me to look at things in a very different way. Sometimes it's really painful, but it can be really important to do. I want to close out with sort of one last question here. Stolen straight from the book Drive by Dan Pink is the suggestion that each day you need to ask yourself, and if everybody asks themselves, what is one thing that I can do to make the part of the world that I control better, would lead to great things. And so I'd actually like to start by asking each of you to name maybe one or two or even three things that people can do to make people like them, their team like coming to work better every day. Denise?
So without a doubt, very specific recognition or praise for something. So it might be something little that you just witnessed that person do, but being very specific about it. Or it might be something just in general. You know, Steve, I appreciate the sense of humor that you always bring. Or for you, I'd actually say I appreciate your honesty. So when I call you and ask you something, sometimes it's brutally honest, but I appreciate the honesty because I always can depend on you to give me the truth. So definitely appreciation. And I think what we talked about so much earlier is that treating everyone like a 10. So if we really treated everyone like they are a rock star, that they're an incredible, trustworthy employee, instead of that sense, once again, that people are trying to get away with something. So if we set up our systems, at the very least, even just set up our mind to treat them like that, I think we'd see just, you know, an incredible difference in our workforce. Because then we'd listen to people, we'd hear their input, we'd act on it. All those things that I hear in focus groups from staff members that we can usually be doing a better job at when we treat people like a 10, you know, we'd be doing those.
Cool. So again, it's sort of focusing on that 85% rather than the 15%, and assuming that people are the 85, part of the 85 and not the 15.
And you know, and if they're in the 15, then hold them accountable.
Yeah, which might mean getting rid of them.
Yes. So, of leadership, it's like Gary said, not just firing.
Yeah. So Dan, concrete suggestions as to how people can make their team like coming to work better.
So I think one of the things that actually people, if you spend time with somebody, you ask them, was that time enjoyable? Was their day at work enjoyable? If they have spent their whole day listening to others, they probably won't have a great day. So I think if you flip that around and you listen more than you talk, and if you listen to employees, especially the people who are doing direct care and the people who are the housekeepers and laundry workers and the dietary staff, you ask them what's going on, what would make their day better, what would make their job better, and you actually provide meaningful ways of them being involved in decision making. They get engaged in their workplace, and they're much happier people. And we know that a more engaged workforce translates into better care for seniors, and that's what this is all about. So how do you create that environment that an engaged staff translates into the best care possible? I believe it's the number one thing is active listening, and that idea of being a servant leader. think there's a lot of that can be said about being a good servant leader and helping, as been said earlier, helping people reach their ultimate optimal level of functioning and having self-worth and self-value in their workplace. So I would boil it down to listening and everything that listening comes with it.
Perfect. Lori?
Yeah, so I think the three things are, one, to give them a really good experience when they come to work. We always talk about our residents needing a great experience. I think it actually starts and ends with our teams having a really good experience. And that means how they're treated, how they dress, how they're responded to, all of that good stuff. And then empowering them to make small decisions. Good grief, if a resident wants a Coke in the middle of the day, let them go and get them a Coke. Why do they have to go ask someone if they need to do that, you know? And then inspiring them, you know, inspiring your team members to be the best at what they want to be. Maybe that's just, you know, maybe it's being a housekeeper, and that's okay. But maybe it's that ED that wants to be the CEO of a company one day, you know, inspiring them to be the best at what they want to be every single day and helping them get there.
Yeah. So, Lori, I appreciate that. And the last thing I sort of like to say, and you sort of gave me the perfect segue into it, is that one of the things that Dan King talks about a lot is this idea that we need to give people autonomy and control over their what they're doing day to day. And it doesn't necessarily have to be something big, but it has to be something that's significant. So if they never make any decisions, if they never have any input on the care, any input on how things are done at food service, or I don't know, how towels are folded, it becomes really demoralizing. But once you go to people and say, hey, you're the one who's doing this thing every day, how can we do this better? I think it'll solve a lot of problems. So any other final thoughts? Other than that, we're going to close. Oh, actually, one more question that did come up. Do you have any thoughts on how we should be talking to millennials and whether we need to be dealing with them differently than other groups? Lori, I can see your head nodding.
Yes, I touched on it a little bit earlier. They're just a different breed. They don't want us to the boss. You know, they want to know, they want to be engaged. It's community style versus individual style. They want praise, 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 and more praise. And they want to feel like they're constantly being fed and, quote, moving up. And being fed, what I mean by that is, you know, infused with information, education, being in the know. You know, they want that. It's not 20 years ago employees that sat behind a desk, came to work, and that was good enough. You have to constantly keep them stimulated. That's what we're finding.
Perfect. Denise?
Everything we shared here, right? And, you know, we've talked about all the things that are important to millennials. So the praise piece, the ability to, you know, make decisions, to be empowered, all of those things that we've already chatted about and ways to do that, you know, is what's important to that group of people as well. But I agree, that old style of leadership of I'm the boss and do as I say absolutely doesn't work. And you know, we're going to be in lots of trouble if that's the way that we continue to lead.
Yep. And it's not as much fun, right? You lose some of the power, but it's not as much fun because you're carrying the weight of the world and you get spread around. Dan, any last thoughts on millennials?
I agree, and maybe something I would add on is there's so much we can learn from millennials. There, those of us who aren't, we should be engaging them and finding out from them what we can do to make the workplace better, and what do they know that we don't, that they can bring to the workplace. And I'll hold one little thing. It's the iPhone and technology. So I would ask, and we have done that at Tabor, and we need to do more of that, is how can we use technology to make our jobs more efficient and spend time doing less of the tasks things that a computer, electronic systems can do, and less paper, and totally engaging their world, because I think those are the attributes that they bring, and that would bring more engagement in the workplace. And we certainly don't have the answers, but I would argue that the millennials have a lot of those keys to solving those issues that we've been dealing with for so many years.
Terrific. So, Bradley, I saw the question that you posted. We'd actually touched on that a little bit earlier, and we are going to repost this. He asked about how are we doing as an industry on retention? And we know we're not doing very well. And a large part of this discussion has been about how to figure that out. Well, Dan and Lori and Denise, thank you so much. Merry Christmas. You know, you guys are great friends in real life, and love getting to cross paths with all of you. And thank you so much for doing this with us on this busy week. So I will talk to you all soon. And for those of you who came on and joined us, I want to say thank you for joining us. And we will do this again. It looks like we had about 122 different people who logged on, and we held on to about 30 for most of the conversations. That was terrific.
Yep.
So thanks again.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Merry Christmas. Happy New Year.
Merry Christmas.
Happy winter solstice. Thank you.
Thank you.